Hello, and welcome to the Everyday Business Problems Podcast. I'm your host, Dave Chrysler. Each episode, we talk to business leaders and subject matter experts to learn about the challenges they've overcome and the challenges they still face. You'll hear fresh insights, real talk, and get inspiration to grow your business. Hey everybody, so excited to be welcoming Chris Lokken back to the podcast. Chris joined the Christensen Group in 2023, but has over 25 years of experience as a resource to employers in a variety of industries, specializing in alternative financing of health benefit plans, process development in management and enrollment of benefit plans, culture and engagement strategies for employers, and risk management surrounding benefit compliance. Chris is always thinking differently about benefit plans, which is why I appreciate talking to him about this stuff where some people might not be able to go nearly as deep. It's one of the things I really appreciate about having Chris on the podcast. Chris, thanks so much for coming on the Everyday Business Problems Podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me today, Dave. It's great to connect with you again.
Yeah. No, totally. Excited to be diving into this pretty heavy topic with you. And it's really about staying ahead of the changes in the fiduciary rules in benefits. And I would venture to guess that not a lot of people know what's going on with this and why it's important. So I think that's probably a great place to kick things off and just maybe give us a bit of background and kind of context around why and what?
Yeah, well, and you're exactly right, Dave. Sometimes people have really looked at some of these rules and just said, I will get to that, or it's not even on their radar. So really what we're talking about is health benefit programs primarily in this, and how they are governed by different rules and regulations that are out there. I think any business owner that has health benefits for their employees has had that moment of anxiety, right, where the benefit increase is in cost, or we have to make those difficult changes as far as, okay, now we're going to ask for more here or more there. I always call it the hydraulics of the discussion, right, where if I push down here, it goes up over here. Or if I push down here, it goes up over there. So we've made a lot of decisions over time. We spend a great deal amount of money in this country, providing health benefits to our employees, but we're also doing that to try to attract and retain the best talent that we possibly can. So there's a lot of different catch-22s in it that many business owners look at it and say, this is a little bit more of a necessary evil than it is something I really want to deal with. So, and part of that strategy that we've used now over time is whether you're a group of 2 or 20 or 200 or 2,000 has been getting more creative in the flexibility of that. This may not pertain to everybody in the U.S. If you're down probably in Alabama, you're more than likely buying from Blue Cross Blue Shield of Alabama, and they have 90+% market share down there, and you're probably buying insurance from them, right? So you're handing off that majority of that risk to Blue Cross Blue Shield of Alabama, and they're handling it for you. That's an anomaly, right? Compared to maybe the Midwestern states, whereas like Wisconsin, where I reside, we do not have any insurance organization that has more than 20% market share in one state, right?
Wow.
So we have this interesting tapestry, if you will, of different regulations, different economies of scale, different healthcare markets, and obviously we're talking about people's health. So there are areas that are more healthy than others. So again, I'm trying to kind of globalize that a little bit for us before we hop in, but a lot of employers have started to kind of go down the road, whether again, you're 220, 200, 2000, down the road of looking at more alternative type of financing of their healthcare plans. Thinking along the ways of a self-funded plan. 15, 20, 25 years ago, the threshold for that was 150 employees. Maybe it was 200 employees. Everybody has their own opinion, right? But ultimately what's happened is as costs have gone up and employers have tried to manage the rules of the Affordable Care Act. Interesting. I'll bring that up back in just a second. They've gone to more of these alternatively financed options, right? So what happens is now what I've done is I've put in a self-funded health plan. Well, why? Because the ACA exempted them. Okay. So there's a lot of rules in states, especially in smaller group insurance, about rating factors and claims and medical conditions and all of this different, all these different things that existed prior to the ACA being passed. Those rules have become challenging and cost prohibitive in many, many states, if that makes sense. Again, I will go down the road of it does go by a state-by-state basis. So sometimes what we find is that I'm an employer. I need to provide benefits. I want to provide good benefits. And my agent or my broker brings in this new self-funded health plan. We also can call them level-funded health plans. But what we're concerned about is that those no longer have that state regulation, that tapestry of state regulations that looks different from state to state. Those are actually not governed by any state insurance office. Okay. Those are actually governed by the federal government through, and now this is the fun part, right, of this. They're governed through ERISA, which is a retirement law. Okay. So welcome to working through regulations with the good folks in the federal government. I will attempt to try to be really nice about that. So, what happens?
That's super interesting. Does that then open up your options because of the fact that it is governed differently than a traditional, to your point about like Blue Cross Blue Shield, of Alabama or Michigan or wherever? Does that then open you up to more competition?
Well, it opens up a number of things. What it does is it changes the funding. It can open up the funding structure, right? So insurance companies are under some things with the ACA called minimum loss ratios. And you would be shocked to learn how tight they administer to those minimum loss ratios. The interesting thing is there's two different versions of it, depending upon size, but let's just use 85% and 15%. The ACA states that they must use 85% of their revenue that they take in to pay for health insurance claims. Okay. 15% is allowed for them to have administrative expenses. In administrative expenses also is included the word profit, right? So, and again, we're not saying profits are bad. What we're saying is that it's just included in that 15%. So, what's happening though is that they don't necessarily, if I have 85% of $1,000, right? I have 850, right? to pay for claims, and I have 150 to pay for administrative expense. If I have let's just say that's 2,000. Now I doubled my numbers. And what they've done is they've been able to build a very, very good economy of scale by not necessarily managing the overall cost of healthcare. That's why we see an 8 to 10% increase typically in those fully insured deals. So when we look at, that's why we take it and start to pick it apart and unbundle it and use that model, because ERISA doesn't say you must pay for this. ERISA doesn't say you must pay for that. And those mandates and what you should pay for are, funnily enough, done state by state, right? So, or you also have to have filing requirements and a lot of premium taxes, other charges that are put on insurance, or what we call fully insured insurance companies, a Blue Cross Blue Shield, United Healthcare, a local regional health maintenance organization. There's different premium taxes, different fees that are needed to be paid to the government. Well, in that state, what we're doing is you can take those out and you can unbundle them using those rules. And hopefully I didn't get too deep in the weeds on that because
it's one of those topics that you have to be in the weeds with, and it kind of sets up really my next question, because the folks that I talk to that are dealing with this stuff, it's kind of like, it's a lot like operations, right? Sometimes you've got people that are really in it, love it, want all the details, and are active, right? Proactive, let's say. And then you've got the reactive folks, and it's there's too much. I don't, there's too many choices. It's too difficult. It's like comparing, it's like mattress shopping online, right? Like
exactly.
it's crazy. And so, from my perspective, it's like, I'd love to understand, what are some of those big misses, the things that people really need to be paying attention to, like, as it kind of relates to these changes. But, again, any employer that I know that's offering benefits, it's because, they care about their people. And it's like, so obviously that's the place where people are trying to come from and balance that with, the cost, both from kind of straight up cost, right, and that administrative side. What are some things people can, get on their radar to wrap their heads around this stuff? Because it is just, there's a lot to unpack with it.
Yes. First of all, I'm going to start with my my manual captioning service here. Okay. I am not an attorney and I am not an accountant. Okay.
I love it.
So I am a benefit consultant, but what we are is we are quarterbacks. Okay. We could argue where on the roster we fall. I like the quarterback aspect of it because I have a lot of sports things in my head all the time, but you have to know are we in a 3-4 defense? Are they shading the safety over the top? Okay, what if we just had a play that comes in? We are on the field trying to move those pieces around as much as possible. And I think where employers historically in this conversation, whether that's a fully insured piece, whether it's a self-funded piece we've kind of talked about a little bit, and then trying to manage all of these pieces, I think what's happened is there's that whole aspect of, let's just get it fixed and let's look at the thing I understand, which is bottom line, right? So that's okay, right? But what most folks haven't done is they haven't developed a kind of a process, right? And I think what's happened is, what I see in the market is that these programs have been marketed or sold to you as an employer saying, hey, it's just like what you have now with Blue Cross Blue Shield, except you might have the opportunity to get some more flexibility. Okay. That's great. And that's a really good pitch, right? Because that's designed to calm my mind about something I don't know very well, right? As a business owner, right? I know, if somebody's really good at figuring out 5-axis machining, I'm not good at that, by the way. But if somebody's really good at 5-axis machining, that's what they do, right? That's their thing. They don't understand insurance. So we calm their mind, we ease their fears, we move on, we run out and, go on to the next one, or we run out and, make sure we don't miss our tea time. Right. So and that's, I think historically, that's kind of how it has gone. But what's happening in that space is you are assuming risk that you didn't assume in your business that you may or may not know about. Right. And that risk comes back in this fiduciary liability thing. Understand, if we were to really, really get deep into fiduciary liability, we're probably talking a 3-week. Some people will argue with me it's a 3-month masterclass. We're not really in the A, we don't have enough time here, and B, we don't usually have enough time ever to think about that. So it really, what it comes down to, and I think where it fits into the world of Dave Chrysler, the Chrysler Club, and the things that you talk about all the time, it's having a process, right? We have a process for making sure that we are, when we have a part build or we have a manufacturing process, we've worked through there. We've used that lean manufacturing. We've done those kinds of things. But we've done that to try to save ourselves time, energy, and money. Guess what? Same thing here. So what are the threats to it? Well, there's been a series of lawsuits within the last 6 to 8 months. And I will say that there's people saying, well, if you're a little smaller, it's not really going to bother you and all that kind of stuff. Well, the funny thing is these lawsuits are basically kind of going back to those ERISA rules that were built in the 70s, by the way, and saying, which were just do the right thing, right?
Yeah.
And what's happening is there have been inconsistencies in health insurance. Everybody listening to this podcast knows that health insurance is not easy to understand, right? Personally, sometimes I get in there and go, man, if there was a way to pay for our health care that was better than this, you'd think a country like ours would have figured it out by now.
Yeah, right.
However, it's hard for people to understand. And somebody's always been sitting at some point in time with a claim that didn't get paid, or something that they ended up going, gosh darn it, I spent another $500 that I didn't think I needed to, or I didn't need to, right? That's not the best system, right? So those things happen every day. This fiduciary liability piece comes into that and says, and now with some attorneys getting involved in this, whether they be attorneys for the government, or which actually has the Department of Labor going out and looking at a couple of insurance companies, as well as with probably the one that everybody may have heard of is the Johnson & Johnson lawsuit, where basically Johnson & Johnson, obviously a very large company. I find it ironic that they are a medical they produce medical goods. They sell pharmaceuticals. They do a lot of different things. They had a problem with their drug plan. And what happened is they were charging people $10,000 for that prescription underneath their pharmacy plan and their health benefits. And people could get it on GoodRx for something in the area of $70. I don't have the exact specifics. Those aren't necessarily important. And what happened is the employees got together and they sued their employer, and using it as what we call the breach of fiduciary liability. You didn't do the right thing, right?
Interesting.
And so now, and then the funny part of this is there are, when we'll talk maybe we have enough time today, we can talk about corporate structures. This was in a large corporation, but they still named the people who made decisions about this in the plan. So, you're a HR exec, you're a C-suite person, and you've said, we're going to pick this program. Mm-hmm. Now you are in the lawsuit, right? So that's kind of the big, kind of scary part of this. That's on a big basis. Let's bring this down a little bit smaller. If you're an owner, you maybe have an HR office manager, purchasing person, right? You sit together and go, okay, well, let's just pick the best one. Wow, this level funded health plan looks great. You may have, if something happens as a result of that, and it's not disclosed and you don't have knowledge of that information, you could have a situation where your employee goes to an attorney and says, hey, they're not doing their job, right? And that's the stuff you've got to start kind of paying attention to if you're going down the road of what we're talking about. And I will say that those plans have been the self-funded health plans, the level funded health plans. Those have been growing in popularity. I have somebody brand new calling me about one of those every week in those solution provider space today. So,
yeah, interesting. I mean, the thing that really resonates with me and what I've been having a lot of conversations around, is general risk mitigation, right? It is astounding, no matter if we're talking about operations, supply chain, benefits in this case, it is astounding how much risk we kind of endure on any given day or expose ourselves to on any given day with very, very little kind of consideration and oversight.
mhm.
And it's not to be, doom and gloom, but bad things happen. Bad things happen to good people. And so it's one thing to make a decision and kind of, actively participate in that decision and know what the risks are. It's another thing to kind of wake up and have that news happen to you kind of unbeknownst to me. Right. And so I think that's what's so interesting about how you laid this out, because I think that is the real undertone of all of this. you know, Understand what is at risk when we make these types of decisions. And it really is not as simple as, what some people may present it as. So I love that example. What are some of the ways that an owner, somebody that's in a leadership position, maybe it's an HR, person that's hearing this, but what are some ways they can maybe unpack, like, what kind of risk am I exposed for given my particular set of circumstances? Is that something that they need to talk to somebody like yourself? Is that something they can kind of dig into themselves a bit? Help
Yeah.
somebody out there maybe thinking, oh boy, where do I start?
Yeah,
Where
exactly.
is that?
Wow. I just figured out
Yeah.
I have a big problem. I just realized I'm assuming a lot more risk than I ever thought I was. Right.
Yeah.
Um, well, I think the biggest thing is I see over time is that, um, and I'll sneak up a little bit. This is not new, right? Walk in to maybe a potential opportunity for us to, earn a client, and they'll go, "We're self-funded." All right. So how's that going? Oh, it works. Okay. What people don't know is they run away from what they don't know. When knowledge is low, fear is high. That's a gal by the name of Eloise Owens. She's a speaker, and I've used that for 20 years. Right. When knowledge is low, fear is high. And by the way, we don't have to go into the 3-week masterclass. Right. Simply asking, how does my policy work? How does my plan work? Those types of details, right? Because, and the funny thing is again, I will say that is, if you can't have a good conversation about that, and you can't have a productive conversation to know where your risks are and aren't, then you may need to bring in some other folks, or maybe you don't have somebody that's necessarily working in your best interest. Okay. I will say, as I went back to my example before, it's a lot easier to go, they don't know insurance. We're just going to get this done so they understand it, right? Well, the funny thing is you don't learn something typically the first time, right?
Yeah.
What you have to know is that you're going to have to invest a little bit more time from, the time that we're making decisions, the times that we're implementing a program, to what does this look like in 6 months? Right. And in that process, what I typically find really, really works for a lot of folks is we can tell the story with data and numbers. Right. I'm not I'm not the biggest book learner in the world. Right. But when I couldn't write a book on how to properly analyze a claims report. I won't be able to give that to you, but I can look at it and go, okay, here's what you got going on. Boop, 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 done. Right. What we learn is you're learning those, you got to learn your metrics. You've got to have those simplified for you. And that's really something we like to talk about, is say, okay, you can't manage what you can't measure. which is sadly, it's not my buddy Matt Guzzi that came up with that. It's Peter Drucker. He stole it from him. I found that out a few weeks ago. I was crushed. But anyway, you can't manage what you can't measure. But let's make it like other pieces of what you're doing in your business. And then that way, from that liability standpoint, you're understanding it. And it's a process, right? It's not just here's your insurance. Yay, I don't have to deal with that for another year. Right.
Yeah.
That's where we have found people are very successful. And again, that can be down in the smaller ranges of, a company of 2 or 3 people to 300 to 3,000 people. It's really getting focused on that aspect of it. And then understanding as you grow through that, what are those components? So we typically like to work in a crawl, walk, run philosophy. I'm not going to probably bring you to the most grandiose option or the most creative option right away, unless you have a lot of desire to do something like that, or you're just like, Chris, take me all the way right away. Very few people are okay with that, right? Yeah. Including maybe even me, right? I may be talking you off the ledge a little bit there, but ultimately, what we typically will do is as you grow in comfort level, then you adjust certain components. It's nothing different than my understanding of, Six Sigma. Well, there's six Sigmas in the Six Sigma, right? We don't start with Sigma, right? We start with all of those different, and that's kind of how we look through it. And the interesting part about it is it's not complicated. It's just taking that time to understand those pieces, how they operate and how they work, because now you have done what you need to be doing in good faith, understanding how your plan works, understanding how it benefits people, and making sure that things are done in a prudent and proper fashion. So,
yeah. I mean, like one of the things that I kind of equate this to is, we all want to be led and learn in some kind of way, right? But along with that, we've got to be continuing to ask questions and really dive in, because and I love, you're saying that you stole, in terms of the kind of knowledge and fear, because I think that's really what is, driving a lot of that, where it can be easy to just say like, I'll deal with it later. Somebody's taking care of that for me. But I see the same thing, when it comes to like technology and tool selection, right? Oftentimes we're saying like, oh, this is the thing this is it. This is the silver bullet. This is going to fix my problem. And the reality of it is it's just another tool. So, we have to understand what's underneath that. And it's not to say that every supplier, every vendor, every, SaaS provider isn't aligned in our best interest, but let's confirm that bias before we just wholly sign up and be kind of blind believers. So I think that's the real takeaway. One of the pieces of this, I'm curious, given the fact that there are, kind of ongoing lawsuits and things are changing with this, and I would imagine it will continue to change. How can people stay, at least up to speed on some of the kind of big pieces like that J&J? I had no idea that was going on. Where can, and maybe I shouldn't, right? Because I'm not in benefits, but, where can people find some of these pieces of the puzzle outside of talking with, somebody that's already providing them a solution? Is there a good resource for that?
It's a little bit challenging because this is heady stuff, right?
Yeah.
Why did I disclaimer what I disclaimered, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm not an attorney and I'm not an accountant. And we are in a bit of a trying to figure out what the crystal ball looks like all the time on this. So I would say you need to find those resources that make sense. Personally, when I wake up every day, we mentioned it in the intro, this is part of benefit compliance. knowing where you're gotta go, right? And by the way, there's only another 20 other things you got to worry about in benefit compliance, right? So it's right now that are kind of in that, they're still in the toddler phase or the newborn phase. They're not in and some of them are getting to be teenagers. So but it's still always a challenge, right? What I would say is there are ways you can do that. I think we have your HR people. I would say that one of the best things they can do is be a member of the Society for Human Resources Management, right? That's neutral. That's not going to sell you anything. Typically, yes, they have a lot of corporate sponsors, but they're not going to sell you information, right?
Yeah.
I think it is our job as consultants to make sure that people have this information, right? That's why I reached out to you and said, hey, let's talk about this, right? It is, and then I would say if you have a good attorney firm, they should be thinking about some of those kinds of things. Although I will say that this one's been a little quiet, if that makes sense. This fiduciary liability piece, there's a lot of things that it's kind of eerie how this is going on and not being talked about as, well, what happens with this, right? I'm a benefit geek. So like my natural environment, is involved with a lot of podcasts that I listen to for my edification, there's been attorneys on those that largely have helped me kind of learn more about this. There are other ways to dig deep into that, but I would say that's kind of, obviously getting involved with like a SHRM, and having your HR people do that is huge. Relying on your consultant, I would say, and I publish 4 or 5 topics every month that I just send out to say, hey, keep an eye on this, right? Let's be thinking about over here because we're over here right now. And then, your attorney firms or accounting firms, depending upon their functionality as they continue to evolve. So that's kind of, that's where those are some good places to start. So.
Yeah, that's great. I heard this phrase from a couple of friends that we mutually know, Damon Pilstaka and Kurt Anderson. I was tuning into their live show earlier, and the phrase "out-teach your competition" was on their podcast, and I loved it because one of the things I appreciate about you, Chris, and you and I have kind of become friends now, over the course of time that we've known each other. But I think when I think about somebody and a resource for stuff like this that isn't salesy, that isn't gonna beat your door down and call you every week and are you ready, you're on that list for me because I think, again, when it comes to this stuff, knowledge is certainly power, and you've got to be able to understand what's going on and try to find some of those holes. So the fact that you offered up the stuff that you publish, that you offered up a couple of other really great resources, I think speaks volume just of the person you are and kind of your approach to things. So, for anybody that's listening, highly encourage you to connect with Chris. I'll share that information towards the end of the show, but highly encourage you to connect with Chris and follow along, because this is the kind of stuff, to your point, that not everybody's talking about, but, as owners, as, leaders, as HR folks, this is the stuff that, is going to be impactful to your team. And, it's the stuff we need to understand. So, so thanks for diving into that. I certainly appreciate it. And I know
we didn't dive. We barely dipped our toe in the water today, Dave. I'm just going to tell you.
As a figure of speech. Do you have any other, maybe examples or things that you've seen that you think would be kind of important to unpack for people, in terms of I mean, given that some of this is only maybe 6 or 8 months old, it sounds like we're really in the early stages of seeing what ultimately kind of is the conclusion, if
Mhm.
there ever will be one. But any other examples or kind of things that you've seen that really need to be, kind of talked about?
Yeah, if you're gonna, I think one of the things we talked about a process, right?
Yeah.
Kind of understanding better and educating yourself. If you're gonna do that, then understand your contracts, right? By the way, that's not that's not new, right? Most folks learn how to understand their contracts better when they have something kind of go wrong,
Yeah.
right? You learn the
Yeah.
lesson, right? Typically in our space, and I'm going to tell you, you know what, the best way to always let people know is that I'm a human as well, right? I'm not some robot. We've done it too, right? Where you look at 125 pages of contract language. It's November 4th, and we have to get the enrollment and everything done before Thanksgiving. Okay. There are times where, and by the way, it's the goofiest thing in the world. We have a huge volume of work, starting in September, and then we run to Christmas and hope we get everything done, right? That's kind of again, that's another process thought that we could talk about for an hour. But ultimately, you get in there and you go, well, I didn't see that in the contract, or we didn't review the contract. The key is those contracts are complicated. Know your contract and know how people are getting paid, because ultimately that's one of those that's kind of the lightning rod, if you will. Whoa, we were in an arrangement where we were paying XYZ vendor that we never ever saw, right? This much amount of money. Well, those are clear concerns, right? So I would say as part of your process, once you understand the components and how they work, know your contract. And I would say, even to some degree, knowing your contract is almost more important than knowing how those components all work together, because ultimately you're signing those contracts. I will tell you that there have been times I've said it's a standard language situation. We reviewed this, we've reviewed this, we've reviewed this, and something's come back, right? And that's the piece that you have to take that extra breath and just say, okay, in this contract, what happens here? What happens here? What happens here? And that can be a collaborative exercise. That does not need to be you're my person, do this, right? But it's ultimately making sure that you know what you're putting yourself out for, because guess what? You would do that with a shipping contract. You do that with a purchase contract. You do that with a sales order. There are terms and conditions in everything. And I think we sometimes overlook that in our businesses, so
Yeah.
there's another
No, that's
100, by the way, too, Dave, but we'll start with the simple stuff. So.
Now, it's, again, you already mentioned it, but it's, we can really get, deep with this and have many, many sessions on this. So yeah, it's tough to go deep enough to, really do the topic justice. And I'm glad, to have you come on to at least bring it up for folks. As we get ready to wind down here, is there any kind of final thoughts? Things that, any other, I guess, advice, at least at a high level, outside of, maybe reaching out to connect with you and follow along to kind of keep up with some of this. Any final thoughts you've got?
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing is don't use this as a reason to not make positive change for your employees. Our ability to deliver something better in a very flawed environment today, at all sectors and sizes of the economy, right? Our ability to deliver that is different than it was, when I started, right? And so I would say, don't use this as that fear aspect to say, no, we're not going to do that, or we're not going to do something that's good for our people, right?
Yeah.
Because of all this stuff. Don't let that be the reason you don't maybe move forward to create a better impact in your employees' lives, because it's amazing how when you do something for people and their family with their benefits and you do a good thing, it's amazing how it helps your turnover, helps them be more productive, and all those different kinds of things. So ultimately, don't use this as the point to not do something. It's just know those pieces that you have to spend a little bit more time on, and find people that you trust and respect to give you the straight answers, and then move forward.
Yeah. Man, I love that because I, I have firsthand knowledge of that really being, a hurdle and people pushing it off because we can get to it later. But, to your point, the impact that it has on the culture side of your business, and then how that impacts every other thing. It really is incredible. So I love that you kind of closed on that thought specifically. What's the best way for people to get in touch with you, Chris?
Best way to get in touch with me is probably email at clokken@christiansengroup.com. I'm available on LinkedIn. We also have built out a YouTube channel as well, where we're talking and taking these things and putting them into digestible bites, right? One of the biggest problems we have, and we're not necessarily just covering ERISA fiduciary liability. We're talking about other things benefit-wise, because it's amazing how the simple things get forgotten and how we can, the easy stuff seems like it can't be that simple. It actually can, right? So just tips and tricks. Not every day are we putting something out there, but it's a good path to kind of find that. And that's Rethinking Benefits with Chris Lokken out on YouTube. So
awesome. Yeah, I'll make sure to put that in the show notes for folks just to make it easy to find. And thanks so much, Chris, for coming on the Everyday Business Problems podcast.
Awesome. It was a great conversation. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you so much for listening today. If we brought you any value, please rate, subscribe, and share our podcast. Also, be sure to connect with us on social media by searching @The Chrysler Club. Until next week, I'm your host, Dave Chrysler.